chosen one. What I'm about to reveal will change your entire perspective on everything that was done to you. Because right now, in this very moment, the people who tried to ruin you are being taught a lesson so profound, so devastating, so absolutely transformative that they will never forget the day they decided to come against someone protected by divine forces. They tried to ruin you. They invested energy in your destruction. They devoted time to your downfall. They committed resources to watching you fail. They gathered others into their scheme, recruited allies for their attack, synchronized their efforts to ensure your complete annihilation. They wanted to see you broken beyond repair. They hoped to watch you crumble into dust. They planned for you to lose everything that mattered: your peace, your purpose, your relationships, your resources, your reputation, your very sense of self. They weren't content with simply disagreeing with you or disliking you or distancing themselves from you. They wanted total ruin. They pursued complete destruction. They sought absolute devastation. This was their goal, their focus, their obsession. Your ruin became their project. But something happened they never saw coming. Something shifted that they couldn't anticipate. Something divine intervened that they couldn't comprehend. God took their attack and transformed it into their education. The universe took their scheme and converted it into their correction. Divine justice took their plot and restructured it into their punishment. What they sent toward you didn't just fail to destroy you. It circled back and became the very instrument of their own undoing, their own lesson, their own devastating education in the laws of cosmic justice. Tonight, you're going to understand exactly how God turned their attack into their lesson. You're going to see the specific ways the universe transformed their scheme into their schooling. You're going to witness how divine forces converted their planned destruction of you into their actual destruction by their own hand, through their own choices, because of their own actions. This isn't just karma. This is divine pedagogy. This is the universe teaching a lesson so vivid, so unmistakable, so perfectly calibrated to the offense that no one watching can miss the point. You don't touch the anointed without learning why that was the worst decision of your life. While they were plotting your ruin, God was plotting their education. While they were coordinating your downfall, divine forces were coordinating their correction. While they were investing in your destruction, the universe was investing in their transformation through the only method they would understand. Direct experience of consequences so severe they could never be forgotten, so precise they could never be dismissed, so devastating they could never be explained away as coincidence or bad luck. Let me show you how this works, how divine justice operates when someone tries to ruin one of its chosen. The first lesson they're learning is about mirrors. Everything they tried to do to you is happening to them, but amplified. They tried to ruin your reputation. Now their own reputation is being destroyed, not by your hand, but by their own actions coming to light, by patterns being recognized, by truth surfacing about who they really are. The universe is showing them what ruin actually looks like, what it feels like to watch your name become associated with betrayal, manipulation, cruelty. And the devastating part, the truly educational component of this lesson, is that they can't blame you. You didn't spread rumors about them. You didn't orchestrate a campaign against their character. You didn't gather people to attack their reputation. Their own actions did this. Their own choices created this. Their own behavior generated these consequences. God is teaching them that when you try to ruin someone else, you're actually building the framework of your own destruction, laying the foundation of your own downfall, constructing the mechanism of your own ruin. They tried to isolate you, to turn people against you, to ensure you stood alone without support. Now they're experiencing isolation they never anticipated. People are distancing themselves, support systems are crumbling, Allies are disappearing, and they're learning what it feels like to be alone. Not because someone schemed against them, but because people recognize their toxicity, sense their darkness, perceive their sickness. This is lesson number 2. The isolation you create for others becomes your own isolation. The loneliness you try to inflict returns as your own loneliness. The abandonment you attempt to orchestrate becomes your own experience of abandonment. God is teaching them through direct experience because that's the only language they understand. They didn't learn from warnings, they didn't learn from examples, they didn't learn from wisdom shared or lessons taught or consequences observed in others. So the universe is teaching them through personal experience, through their own suffering, through their own consequences. This is divine pedagogy at its most effective, converting someone's attack into their education by making them live through what they tried to inflict. They tried to block your opportunities, to close doors that should have opened for you, to ensure your path was filled with obstacles. Now their own opportunities are evaporating, doors are slamming shut. Paths are blocked by barriers they can't overcome. Projects fall apart at the last moment. Deals dissolve just before completion. Success slips through their fingers repeatedly, consistently, devastatingly. And in this repeated failure, in this consistent blocking, they're learning lesson number 3. When you try to obstruct someone else's path, you're actually creating obstacles in your own. When you attempt to close doors for others, you're sealing your own exits. When you work to block someone's progress, you're guaranteeing your own stagnation. The precision of this lesson is extraordinary. They're not experiencing random bad luck. They're experiencing specific consequences directly related to what they tried to do to you. The areas where they attacked you are the exact areas where they're now failing. The methods they used against you are the methods now being used against them. The weapons they deployed are now pointed at themselves. This is divine justice operating with surgical precision, cosmic correction executing with perfect accuracy, universal law delivering education specifically calibrated to the crime. Let's talk about the lesson around energy and intention, because this is where their education becomes particularly profound. They invested tremendous energy in trying to ruin you. Hours of their life spent plotting, days consumed with scheming, weeks devoted to coordinating attacks, months invested in maintaining their campaign against you. All that energy, all that time, all that focus, it had to go somewhere. Energy doesn't disappear. It transforms. And the energy they sent toward you with malicious intent is returning to them as consequence, as correction, as cosmic education. They're learning that energy follows intention, that what you send out returns, that malicious focus creates malicious results for the sender. This is lesson number 4. The energy you invest in someone else's destruction becomes the energy destroying you. The time you devote to another's downfall becomes time stolen from your own construction. The focus you direct toward harming others becomes the lens through which you view your own collapse. They're experiencing energy bankruptcy. They spent so much trying to ruin you that they neglected their own lives, ignored their own growth, abandoned their own development, and now they're looking at the ruins of their own existence, wondering how they ended up here, unable to recognize that they built this destruction with their own hands, through their own choices, by their own investment in your ruin. God is teaching them about opportunity cost. Every moment they spent plotting against you was a moment not spent building their own life. Every hour devoted to your destruction was an hour stolen from their own construction. Every day consumed with attacking you was a day they weren't investing in their own growth. And now they see the cost of that choice. Now they understand what they sacrificed. Now they comprehend what they lost by choosing to focus on your ruin instead of their own elevation. This is perhaps the most painful lesson. They could have been building something beautiful during all that time they were plotting your destruction. They could have been creating opportunities during all those hours they were coordinating attacks. They could have been manifesting abundance during all those days they were scheming your downfall. But they chose differently. They chose your ruin over their own rise. They selected your destruction over their own construction. They picked your downfall over their own elevation. And now, they live with that choice, with the consequences of that decision, with the reality of what they sacrificed in pursuit of something that never happened. Your permanent defeat. Let's examine the lesson about divine protection, because this is where their education becomes truly humbling. They tried to ruin you, but you're still standing. They attacked you with everything they had, but you're still here. They coordinated their efforts, synchronized their timing, maximized their impact, yet you survived. You more than survived. You thrived. You grew stronger. You became more powerful. You elevated higher. And this reality, this undeniable fact, is teaching them lesson number 5. Some people are protected by forces you cannot fight, defended by powers you cannot overcome, backed by divine authority you cannot challenge. They're learning that not everyone is vulnerable to attack. Not everyone can be destroyed by human schemes. Not everyone falls when pushed. Some people, the chosen ones, the divinely appointed, those with sacred assignments, they're protected by forces that don't negotiate with jealous humans, that don't consider the opinions of envious attackers, that don't factor human plotting into divine plans. These protections aren't passive shields. They're active forces that turn attacks back on attackers, that convert schemes into consequences for schemers, that transform plots into punishments for plotters. This lesson is humbling them in ways they never anticipated. They thought they were powerful. They believed their collective effort would be enough. They assumed their coordinated attack would overwhelm you. But they discovered something that terrifies them. They're not powerful at all when facing someone under divine protection. Their collective effort means nothing against cosmic backing. Their coordinated attack bounces off someone defended by heaven. They're learning what it means to be powerless, truly powerless, not in the face of another human, but in the face of divine will that has decided you will not fall, you will not break, you will not be destroyed regardless of what they attempt. God is teaching them humility through their own failed attack. They're being shown that their power has limits, that their influence has boundaries, that their ability to harm stops at the edge of divine protection. This education is destroying their ego, shattering their arrogance, demolishing their false sense of superiority. They thought they were gods who could determine your fate. They're learning they're merely humans who violated cosmic law and must face correction for that violation. Now let's talk about the lesson regarding spiritual warfare, because this is where their education takes on dimensions they never expected. They engaged in spiritual warfare without understanding what that actually means. They attacked someone in spiritual dimensions without comprehending the forces they were invoking, the powers they were challenging, the laws they were breaking. They thought spiritual warfare was just about intention, about focused negative energy, about coordinated malice. They didn't understand it's about aligning with forces, partnering with powers, engaging in battles where the outcome isn't determined by human will but by spiritual authority. They aligned themselves with darkness to attack you. They partnered with forces they thought would help them destroy you. They engaged in practices they believed would give them power over you. But what they didn't realize is that darkness betrays its servants, that malicious forces turn on those who employ them, that weapons of spiritual warfare harm the wielder when used against those under divine protection. They're learning lesson number 6. Spiritual warfare isn't a game. It's not a metaphor. It's not symbolic. It's real engagement with real forces that demand real prices, and when you employ these forces against someone protected by light, against someone defended by divine authority, those dark forces you invoke turn against you with a vengeance. They're experiencing spiritual backlash. The entities they invited in to harm you are now tormenting them. The forces they tried to direct toward your destruction are now focused on theirs. The darkness they attempted to cast upon you has enveloped them instead. This is spiritual warfare's most fundamental law. Darkness cannot defeat light. Shadow cannot overcome radiance. Evil cannot triumph over divine protection. When you try to use darkness against light, you simply become engulfed in your own shadow, consumed by your own darkness, destroyed by your own weapon. God is teaching them that spiritual forces are not toys, that cosmic powers are not tools to be used casually, that divine laws are not suggestions to be ignored. They're learning this through experiencing the consequences of their spiritual foolishness, through suffering the backlash of their metaphysical arrogance, through enduring the results of their cosmic miscalculation. They thought they were powerful practitioners. They're discovering they were foolish children playing with forces they couldn't control, weapons they couldn't handle, powers they couldn't contain. Let's examine the lesson about truth and lies, because this is particularly relevant to how they tried to ruin your reputation. They spread lies about you. They created false narratives. They manufactured stories designed to make you look like the villain while they played the victim. They twisted truth, distorted reality, presented fiction as fact. And for a while, some people believed them. For a season, their lies seemed to work. For a moment, they thought their false narratives would permanently damage your reputation. But truth has a quality that lies don't have: persistence. Truth endures when lies collapse. Reality persists when fiction fades. Facts remain when fabrications crumble. They're learning lesson number 7. Lies are expensive to maintain. Truth is free to sustain. Deception requires constant energy. Honesty requires nothing but time. Their lies are collapsing under their own weight. Their false narratives are contradicting themselves. Their manufactured stories are being exposed by reality itself. And here's the educational component that's devastating them. They have to watch as truth emerges without your intervention. You didn't have to defend yourself. You didn't have to argue your case. You didn't have to prove your innocence. Truth did that work itself. Time revealed reality. Circumstances demonstrated facts. People discovered who you really are simply by paying attention, by comparing their lies to your actual character, by contrasting their stories with your real actions. God is teaching them that truth always emerges, that reality always surfaces, that facts always overcome fiction given enough time. They're learning they wasted their energy spreading lies because lies don't last. They exhausted themselves maintaining false narratives because deception demands constant reinforcement. They destroyed their own credibility through their dishonesty because liars are eventually recognized for what they are. This lesson is particularly painful because they can see the direct connection between their lying and their current reputation crisis. People don't trust them now because they lied then. Their words carry no weight now because their deceptions were revealed. Their character is questioned now because their dishonesty was exposed. Now let's talk about the lesson regarding judgment and mercy, because this is where divine pedagogy becomes most profound. When they were attacking you, you could have retaliated. You had opportunities to strike back. You possessed information that could have damaged them. You had access to people who would have believed your side. You could have launched a counterattack, could have organized your own campaign, could have gathered forces to destroy them the way they tried to destroy you. But you didn't. You took a different path. You chose a different response. You selected a different strategy. You let God handle it. This choice, this decision to release them to divine justice rather than taking personal revenge, is now their most profound lesson. They're learning lesson number 8. The person who doesn't retaliate isn't weak. They're wise. The one who doesn't strike back isn't powerless, they're powerful. The individual who releases enemies to divine justice isn't naive. They're knowledgeable about how the universe actually works. Your choice not to destroy them personally didn't save them from destruction. It guaranteed their destruction would be more thorough, more educational, more transformative because cosmic justice is more precise than human revenge. Divine correction is more effective than personal retaliation. Universal law is more devastating than individual payback. They're experiencing correction that's perfectly calibrated to their offense. Human revenge would have been messy, imprecise, possibly excessive in some areas and insufficient in others. But divine justice is surgically precise. It targets exactly what needs correction. It addresses specifically what needs healing. It focuses exclusively on the lessons that need learning. They're being taught in the exact areas where they attacked you, corrected in the precise ways they tried to harm you, educated through experiencing specifically what they attempted to inflict. This precision terrifies them because it reveals something they hoped wasn't true. There are powers beyond human control that observe human actions, record human choices, execute divine judgment on human behavior. They're learning that the universe isn't neutral, that cosmic forces aren't indifferent, that divine justice isn't a metaphor but a reality that functions with more reliability than any human court, with more accuracy than any human judgment, with more consistency than any human system. God is teaching them that mercy was available. Before their attack, during their scheming, even at the beginning of their consequences, mercy was offered. They could have stopped, they could have repented, they could have turned back. But they interpreted mercy as permission, patience as weakness, long-suffering as absence. Now they're learning that mercy delayed isn't mercy denied, that divine patience isn't divine indifference, that long-suffering has limits beyond which justice must execute its sentence. Let's examine the lesson about witnesses and testimony, because this is crucial to understanding the full scope of their education. They thought their plotting was secret. They believed their scheming was hidden. They assumed their attacks went unwitnessed. But nothing is secret in the spiritual realm. Nothing is hidden from divine awareness. Nothing goes unwitnessed by cosmic consciousness. Every meeting where they plotted was recorded. Every conversation where they schemed was documented. Every moment where they coordinated was witnessed. They're learning lesson number 9. Spiritual forces witness everything. Divine powers record all actions. Cosmic consciousness documents every deed. There are no truly secret meetings when divine observers are present. There are no completely hidden schemes when spiritual witnesses record everything. There are no perfectly concealed attacks when universal awareness documents all actions. They're discovering that their most private plotting was actually their most documented activity, that their most secret meetings were actually their most witnessed gatherings, that their most concealed schemes were actually their most recorded conspiracies. This lesson is particularly devastating because it means they can't hide, can't deny, can't pretend innocence. The evidence exists in spiritual dimensions. The record persists in cosmic archives. The testimony stands in divine courts. They're being confronted with their own actions documented so thoroughly that denial becomes impossible, exposed so completely that lies become useless, revealed so comprehensively that defense becomes futile. God is teaching them that accountability is real, that nothing escapes divine notice, that all actions face cosmic reckoning. This education is stripping away their ability to hide behind lies, to shield themselves with deceptions, to protect themselves with false narratives. They're being exposed, revealed, laid bare before forces that see everything, know everything, judge everything according to perfect justice rather than human manipulation. Now let's talk about the lesson regarding time and seasons, because understanding this will help you see the full wisdom of divine timing. They tried to ruin you during what they thought was your vulnerable season. They attacked when they believed you were weak. They struck when they assumed you couldn't defend yourself. They coordinated their campaign during what appeared to be your lowest point. This timing wasn't accidental. They chose it deliberately, carefully, strategically. They wanted to ensure their attack would land hardest, hurt deepest, damage most severely. But what they didn't understand is that seasons are divinely appointed, times are cosmically determined, moments are universally arranged. Your vulnerable season wasn't vulnerability at all. It was preparation. Your weak moment wasn't weakness at all. It was positioning. Your lowest point wasn't defeat at all. It was the necessary descent before your rise. They attacked during your winter not knowing spring was divinely scheduled. They struck during your night not knowing dawn was cosmically guaranteed. They schemed during your valley not knowing the mountain was universally promised. They're learning lesson number 10. Divine timing overrides human timing. Cosmic seasons supersede human planning. Universal appointments cannot be canceled by human interference. Their attack came at precisely the wrong time for them and exactly the right time for your growth, for your transformation, for your elevation. God used their attack as the catalyst for your breakthrough. Their scheme as the trigger for your rising. Their plotting as the pressure that transformed you from who you were into who you needed to become. This lesson is perhaps the most frustrating for them because they did everything right according to human strategy. They timed their attack perfectly according to conventional wisdom. They struck when anyone observing would have said you were most vulnerable. But they didn't account for divine intervention, didn't factor in cosmic protection, didn't consider universal plans that supersede human scheming. They're learning that conventional wisdom means nothing against divine wisdom, that human strategy fails against cosmic design, that perfect timing according to earthly standards means nothing against heavenly schedules. God is teaching them that they're not in control, that their timing isn't determinative, that their strategy isn't ultimate. This lesson is humbling their pride, exposing their arrogance, revealing their foolishness in thinking they could override divine appointment with human plotting. Cancel cosmic plans with earthly scheming. Defeat universal purposes with mortal strategies. Let's examine the lesson about investment and return, because this is where divine economics teaches them about spiritual mathematics. They invested heavily in your ruin. Time, energy, resources, focus, all directed toward one goal: watching you fall. This was their investment. This was where they put their assets. This was how they spent their capital. And every investment expects a return. They anticipated seeing you destroyed. They expected to watch you broken. They waited to witness you defeated. That was their expected return on investment. But investment laws work differently in spiritual dimensions than they do in earthly markets. In divine economics, what you invest comes back to you, not to your target. In cosmic mathematics, returns flow to investors, not to their intended victims. In universal accounting, you reap what you sow in your own field, not in someone else's. They're learning lesson number 11. The energy you invest in another's destruction returns as your own destruction. The resources you devote to someone's downfall come back as your own collapse. The focus you direct toward another's ruin manifests as your own devastation. They're experiencing negative returns on their malicious investment. Everything they put into trying to ruin you is returning to them as ruin in their own lives. Every hour they spent plotting is manifesting as hours of their own suffering. Every resource they devoted to your downfall is being extracted from their own holdings. Every bit of focus they directed toward your destruction is now concentrated on their own collapse. This is divine economics executing perfect justice. Malicious investors receive malicious returns. Destructive sowers reap destructive harvests. Ruin plotters experience their own ruin. God is teaching them that you cannot escape the mathematics of spiritual investment, that divine economics functions with perfect precision, that cosmic accounting always balances books accurately. They tried to create bankruptcy in your life. They're experiencing bankruptcy in their own. They attempted to devastate your holdings. They're watching their own holdings devastate. They scheme to collapse your foundations. They're enduring the collapse of their own. The returns are perfectly calibrated to their investment. The harvest matches exactly what they sowed. The consequences reflect precisely what they attempted to create for you. Now let's talk about the lesson regarding strength and weakness, because this is fundamental to understanding how their scheme backfired. They interpreted your kindness as weakness. They mistook your patience for inability to respond. They confused your peace with powerlessness. They saw your refusal to engage in their drama as evidence you couldn't fight back. Every quality that actually demonstrated your strength, they misread as proof of your vulnerability. This misreading became the foundation of their attack strategy. They're learning lesson number 12. Kindness isn't weakness but wisdom. Patience isn't inability but power. Peace isn't powerlessness but strength. Refusal to engage isn't cowardice but consciousness. The qualities they thought made you vulnerable were actually the evidence of your protection, the signs of your divine backing, the proof of your spiritual maturity. They attacked someone who chose not to fight, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't need to, who refused to engage not because they were afraid, but because they knew forces were fighting for them, who maintained peace not because they were weak, but because they were secure in divine defense. This misreading cost them everything. They underestimated their target. They miscalculated the resistance they would face. They failed to recognize the forces backing you. And this miscalculation, this fundamental misreading of strength and weakness, guaranteed their attack would fail. Their scheme would backfire. Their plot would become their own undoing. God is teaching them that appearances deceive, that surface observations miss deeper realities, that human assessment fails to perceive spiritual truth. They're being educated in humility. The person they thought was weak turned out to be stronger than they could imagine. The target they believed was vulnerable proved to be invulnerable to their attacks. The victim they assumed would be easy to destroy demonstrated power they couldn't comprehend. This reversal, this complete contradiction of their assessment, is forcing them to question everything they thought they knew about power, strength, vulnerability, weakness. They're learning that true strength often looks like gentleness. Real power often appears as peace. Genuine security often manifests as stillness. God is teaching them to look deeper, to perceive beyond surfaces, to recognize that spiritual realities override physical appearances. This lesson will serve them if they're humble enough to learn it, if they're wise enough to internalize it, if they're genuine enough to transform through it. But whether they learn or not, the lesson is being taught through their experience of attacking someone they fundamentally misunderstood, underestimated, miscalculated. Let's examine the final lesson, the ultimate education that encompasses all the others. When you try to ruin someone God is elevating, you're not fighting that person but fighting God, not opposing a human but opposing divine will, not attacking an individual but attacking cosmic purpose. This is the meta lesson, the overarching teaching, the fundamental truth their entire experience is designed to burn into their consciousness. You cannot win against God. You cannot succeed against divine will. You cannot triumph against cosmic purpose. They tried to ruin you. God turned their attempt into your promotion. They schemed your downfall. Divine forces converted their scheme into your rising. They plotted your destruction. Cosmic powers transformed their plot into your elevation. Every attack became a stepping stone. Every obstacle became an opportunity. Every attempt to push you down became the force propelling you up. This transformation, this divine alchemy, is teaching them lesson number 13. God can turn any attack into advancement for those under divine protection, any scheme into success for those with sacred assignments, any plot into promotion for those walking in purpose. They're watching in horror as everything they meant for evil is being used for good in your life. They're witnessing in despair as every weapon they formed is not just failing but actually helping you. They're observing in shock as their best efforts to destroy you are becoming the very elements of your construction, the building blocks of your elevation, the foundation stones of your rising. This is perhaps the most devastating lesson because it renders all their efforts not just futile but counterproductive, not just failed but actually beneficial to their target, not just unsuccessful but actually serving the opposite of their intention. God is teaching them the ultimate lesson. Divine will cannot be thwarted, cosmic purpose cannot be prevented, heavenly plans cannot be canceled. No matter how clever their scheming, how coordinated their attack, how synchronized their efforts, they cannot stop what God has ordained, cannot prevent what the universe has decreed, cannot cancel what heaven has scheduled. They're learning that their power is nothing against divine power, their will means nothing against cosmic will, their plans count for nothing against universal plans. This education is complete. Their lesson is thorough. The teaching is comprehensive. They tried to ruin you but became the students in a divine classroom where the curriculum is consequence. The teacher is cosmic justice. The textbook is their own experience. The final exam is whether they learn from this or remain in denial. Some will graduate through genuine transformation. Others will fail by refusing to learn. But either way, the lesson has been taught through their own suffering, through their own consequences, through their own experience of what happens when you try to ruin someone God is building. When you attack someone, the universe is elevating. When you plot against someone, heaven is protecting. You chosen one, you don't need to teach them anything. You don't need to explain their lesson. You don't need to point out what they're learning. God is their teacher. The universe is their instructor. Divine justice is their professor. Your job is simply to keep rising, keep building, keep manifesting the destiny they tried to prevent. Your elevation is their education. Your success is their lesson. Your thriving despite their attack is the final proof that God turned their scheme into their schooling, their plot into their punishment, their attack into their ultimate teaching moment. They tried to ruin you, but God turned it into their lesson, and that lesson will echo through eternity as a warning to anyone else who considers attacking the chosen. When you come against someone under divine protection, you're not starting a war you can win, but enrolling in a class you'll never forget, not launching an attack that will succeed, but signing up for an education that will transform you through the devastating experience of discovering that God protects the anointed, defends the chosen, elevates the appointed regardless of human schemes, regardless of earthly plotting, regardless of mortal attacks. They tried to ruin you. God said, "Let me teach them why that was their biggest mistake." And now they're learning. Now they're students in the school of divine justice. Now they're being educated in cosmic law, and their lesson will never be forgotten.